All right. Talking about Osama bin Laden, and in particular, Osama bin Laden by Michael Scheuer. So, because of Michael Scheuer, this book is particular interest. If you're not familiar, this is the same guy who wrote Imperial Hubris, and he was a CIA guy in the bin Laden unit for a time, and then he anonymously wrote this book, and he has some clout in all sorts of dissident circles. Scheuer himself, he'd eventually marry the woman from Zero Dark 30, like in real life. And I mean, a lot of his criticism of the U.S. was a lot of his criticism of the way that the Bush administration pursued bin Laden and fought terrorism. He was that it was ineffective. Not to say it shouldn't have been done, but it should have been done in a different way. And so he wrote a lot about how people ignorantly went about this. You know, they just didn't know much what they were dealing with. Is a lot of what he's writing about. That's going to be a lot of what this book is about. And if you know much about bin Laden or not, you could. I mean, it's not a very big book, and to write a biography of bin Laden is difficult because he's a terrorist, and there's only so much sources and things really for someone who spent so long just without a trace. And a good part of it is what he's arguing is that bin Laden wasn't someone who just occupied a symbolic role after 9/11, which is a prevailing idea in the U.S. that, because you'll hear from however many people that Al-Qaeda was like just an idea, like Antifa or something. Like there's no central structure or leadership or so, but it's anyone who follows along with this idea can brand themselves as Al-Qaeda. Scheuer argues against this, that AQC was very much active, and he shows how kind of involved they were. And it shows the process, say, and how they did have difficulties, say, reeling in people like Zarqawi, which Scheuer describes. He goes into Iraq quite a bit, and this is the most difficult time for bin Laden, where things are getting really out of hand. But it's still very it's a critical book of a lot of people. I mean, he talks about how Saudis maybe have a view of radicals. Say he takes a view that bin Laden is not influenced entirely by Egyptians in the way that you might have thought. Because for Saudis, if someone becomes a radical, it's likely that they're infected with this Egyptian kind of thought. And so some people would look at some of bin Laden's tutors as, he had the Egyptian tutor. Or you have like Muslim Brotherhood. And there are however many Al-Qaeda people ended up being Egyptian. But he argues that this isn't what bin Laden was really about. He argues that bin Laden was not a Takfiri, and that, I mean, bin Laden comes from, he has this billionaire family. And so he has all the wealth and resources in the world, a Saudi family, who they have a Wahhabi background, just like any Saudis, but Scheuer points out they're not particularly radical in their Wahhabism, but Osama bin Laden himself obviously gets pretty into it, and so he abandons kind of a life of luxury. I mean, he works as he's an engineer, and he brings a lot of he's someone who likes to get his hands dirty. He likes to be the kind of billionaire who's has a little grit, and he wants to experience things. So he ends up in the jihad, and he in Afghanistan, and this is where his ideas are formulated. But bin Laden himself, he points out that he's against a lot of the scholars who will back up all the tyrannical regimes, but bin Laden himself is not someone who, he's not beholden. He's not he's not really into Qutb, Syed Qutb, as much as has been said. Scheuer is what Scheuer is arguing, that he's classically trained, Wahhabi Muslim, and he has all the classical kind of schooling that would be expected, and isn't as motivated by like radical Egyptian thought, as people might say, because what Scheuer is saying is that seems convenient to the Saudis, and what they have going on. What do you think about that? I'll say that there is a lot of Egyptian influence I see in the Middle East. I know in Iraq there would be always the Egyptian TV channels. If you go in the houses where they might play American movies, but they might have Egyptian movies or Egyptian music videos, and they'll play this. Some of the big channels I remember were the Egyptian channels, and they were very familiar with Egyptian type stuff. But Scheuer is arguing that there are different streams of thought here, and some of it's definitely arguable, like the way he goes into what a Takfiri is or so, because he'll say the charge against bin Laden is that he's a Takfiri, but actually bin Laden's whole life he's attacked by Takfiris, and multiple times there were Takfiris who tried to assassinate him. So this shows that he is not himself a Takfiri. But I mean, I found Scheuer's arguments here kind of, you have to figure, if you're a jihadist, a Takfir, this is, for Muslims, Takfir is just the act of just saying someone else isn't a Muslim, or that, and in particular that maybe they're an apostate, and so you can kill them. So Takfir is just you just declare someone to be an apostate Muslim. And I mean, Al-Qaeda definitely engages in this, and certainly Al-Qaeda in Iraq did. That was a huge operating principle that they seem to have. But I would say bin Laden did too. You got to figure, if you surround yourself by people like that, then this kind of fundamentalist, attitudes. Yeah, you're always going to be not Muslim enough by someone's standard. So, yeah, they would try to kill him sometimes, or different factions would try to kill him for not being harsh enough. But I wouldn't say it. I'd say it's not like there's a Takfiri really tradition, and but I don't. But he seems to. I mean, Scheuer is definitely. This stuff can be. I mean, people can look at this stuff in a different way and interpret it in a different way. I think Scheuer maybe looks at it one way, But I don't necessarily think it's all correct. Scheuer, for Scheuer, like it seems like he is defending Bin Laden. I mean, to write like a biography, to get like into somebody, to study someone, you probably, you know, you're gonna you start to sympathize with them in a certain way, or start to admire them or something. Not to say he didn't want he obviously he wanted Bin Laden dead, but he thinks of him as like a certain kind of adversary, maybe a worthy adversary that should have been taken more seriously, is a lot of what he's saying. But it goes into a lot of how Bin Laden lived his life, and how he was into austerities, and he didn't like ice in his water. He didn't like furniture at all, and so he was uncomfortable with anything resembling luxury, but he had all the resources to pour into jihad, and it goes into kind of how his methodologies, where they came from. Say in the way he interpreted Bin Laden, the way he saw the Soviet Union going down, is that he credited that to not so much that they beat the Russians militarily in Afghanistan, but that they destroyed them economically, because they made the Russians spend so much. The war became so unprofitable for them that their whole system collapsed. And Scheuer himself he doesn't he's not convinced of this, but he's saying that Bin Laden was, and this is how he decided to proceed going forward against the United States. That this would be how his war would prevail, with a large scale guerrilla war, that he would draw the US into this war, and it would economically destroy the US. And what Scheuer is warning against is that we're falling into Bin Laden's trap. This book wasn't written like just yesterday. This was this came out. This copy came out after Bin Laden is dead, but just after. But it's, I'm sure there are books. Peter Bergen writes very good books, and he's gone into. You'll find more information on Bin Laden in his books. I mean, but this one, just because of Scheuer, and it's an easy volume to just approach if you're curious about who Bin Laden was, because this was and just how, I mean, how much of what he did was like by plan, or so, with the war on terror and all these things. How much was directly Bin Laden's vision, or how much of it was an accident? And that's the sort of thing he's going into, how all this stuff developed. It's and you get a good sense of, I mean, you read this book and it dispels a lot of the weird conspiracies too, because I mean, Scheuer isn't he's not someone who just watches the mainstream media and is dumb and doesn't know all the I mean, he's someone who was held up for a time as a major like kind of a dissident guy, like, because he would his approach was extremely critical of just what the US was doing in most things. So he's not trying to really cover up for anyone, but he's not saying that Bin Laden was. People will say Bin Laden is backed by the US, and I know I mentioned this, but there's really none of that going on. The closest thing would be bin Laden was working with Abdullah Azam to fundraise for the war in Afghanistan, but it didn't amount to, say, the U.S. backing bin Laden himself. He was always trying to do his own thing. He had his own resources and his own approach. And it talks about how, say, other foreign fighters, they'd show up to Afghanistan, and Azam would parcel them out to different local units, but bin Laden was trying to keep his people, Al-Qaeda, the base, together. For, he had different reasons why he wanted a group of the foreign fighters to be their own special thing and to be kind of uncorrupted by some of the Afghan elements of the Afghan war. Other than that, he is surrounded by quite a few Egyptians. But and then a lot of I guess what the motivation he goes into at bin Laden is definitely Israel, and bin Laden describes Israel in very lurid terms. This is what he says is entirely why the U.S. is the enemy of Al-Qaeda. He does say different things as far as this goes. Scheuer is arguing that Scheuer argues that bin Laden is not totally carried away. It's like he doesn't call for the deaths of the Saudi royal family and things like that, and he doesn't go as far as certain maybe other groups do, or other groups might think that he did himself. But he's looking. Al-Qaeda was meant to be a group that would correct things politically, and he identified Israel as essentially controlling the U.S. This is what bin Laden says, and there's quotes from him in this book where he says it in very clear terms how this is his view. Like this is what bin Laden was about. I think this is a cool book as far as it being it's short, and it's something. It goes over any relevant details, and if you have any disagreements, I mean, it's all here. Bin Laden is somebody who, I mean, I know, like I would kind of think when bin Laden was alive, you would wonder how much he was commanding Al-Qaeda, So you would wonder, if it was possible to bump into him on the battlefield, if you could kill bin Laden yourself someday. And Scheuer is arguing that bin Laden was critical in what Al-Qaeda was doing and its operations and its strategic objectives. It's not just a bunch of random stuff, but this is a real organization. So this would be a good place to start. Even a good place to finish. Just in terms of bin Laden isn't something some hot ticket now, but it's worth going into just from how much 9/11 did change things and the whole war, and maybe there's some insight to be had here in how we can fix things going forward with maybe to end a war on terror, maybe to not keep things going with these radical Sunni elements where the world stage is kind of making this more like an inconvenience that we don't, that it is a solvable problem, I guess. And some of what Scheuer, I guess, writes that, like, when I think of this, it's not just endless. He, as critical as he is, he's he is kind of pointing out fixable problems where something can be done. Like there are solutions here to make these problems go away, or to fix some of the stuff, and to make sure, you know, like there were errors on the way in making Bin Laden a thing. So this is kind of what Scheuer goes into, and just, I guess his whole thing here is just to spread some awareness with on who Bin Laden really is. And this is a pretty cool book. Osama bin Laden